Good afternoon. Welcome to the Washington County Public Affairs Forum, December 15th. We have a wonderful program today here at the Peppermill Restaurant. We have an exciting look at a recent election from two people who were victorious in that election. We have Representative John Davis and Representative Tobias Reed here. They'll be up here and introduce themselves in just a few moments. After each of them have a 15-minute presentation, giving us some insights, I'm sure, then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. Folks, only forum members get to ask questions, and we'd like them to be a little bit brief and to the point if we could. And without further ado, I would like to introduce, I'm not sure who's going first. Can I go? Okay, we'll have Mr. Davis up first. John Davis, please. I thought you were waving your hand. Mr. Davis.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to visit with you today and share a little bit about what we have upcoming in the 2015 legislative session in the state of Oregon. As a show of bipartisan support to begin this meeting, Representative Reed and myself are splitting a club sandwich and the fries that go with it. And I think that sets a nice tone for the way that we operate in the Oregon legislature. I was just having a conversation with your president about how divisive politics can be, and he was mentioning city politics and saying, oh, you know, it seems like things can get heated down in Salem. And I mentioned the fact that somewhere in the range of 80% of the bills that we pass in the legislature, and the bills that we hear, have near unanimous bipartisan support. With 60 members in the House, it might pass with 40 or 50 members on both sides of the aisle voting for it, and with members on both sides of the aisle for various reasons voting against a bill. And only roughly 10% of bills that we see come down to a divisive sort of partisan divide. So that leaves 80 to 90% of the issues that we deal with in a very collaborative and constructive manner. That's often surprising, especially when you consider the volume, the sheer volume of bills we hear in the legislature. This session, I think pre-session, our legislative council has drafted somewhere around 2,400 bills. We expect that number to grow between now and the first week of February when our session begins in earnest. And on average, we see about 3,000 bills every session in the 5-month period between February and the 4th of July, when we hope to adjourn in 2015. So you're talking about 3,000 bills on the committees on which I sit, which are Revenue. I'll be Vice Chair of Transportation and Economic Development, Land Use and Rural Communities, which is also going to be involved with water issues this year, and the Healthcare Transition Committee. On those 4 committees and the bills that I'll see on the floor of the House, there'll be roughly about 1,000. So 3,000 bills we hear as a body, about 1,000 that we might vote on in the House. So the sheer extent and the workload involved in the legislature is pretty significant. I'd like to give you a little bit of background about myself, talk a little bit about my personal goals as a legislator this session, and then talk about where I see the legislature going in general. And I also want to begin by just saying thank you for really being one of the premier public voice opportunities in Washington County as an organization. I'm constantly disappointed, in fact, at the lack of public engagement that we have from my constituents in the district. You can communicate with me by cell phone, by text, by email, by Facebook messaging me, by Twittering me, by coming down to the legislature, by calling my office. We have made it so simple, including forms on our website at the legislature, to communicate with your legislator. But on average, less than 1% of constituents really take the time to even write a 5-minute email or make a 5-minute phone call. And so the fact that this organization exists to give a voice to Washington County, that you all take time out of your schedules to participate in the public process, I'd like to commend you and just say thank you. And anything we can do to make organizations like this more vibrant is a good thing to alleviate the issue that I was just talking about. I come from Washington County. I grew up just sort of down the road in Raleigh Hills. Grew up in Washington County, Raleigh Hills, and then moved out to Tualatin, Westland, Wilsonville area. So I'm kind of a child of both living on the border of Washington County and Clackamas County. My wife also grew up in Washington County next to Tualatin, and we both went to the same elementary school, the same middle school. We rode the same school bus for about 5 years, and my wife Sarah and I never knew each other until we met at George Fox University in college. So I went out Newburgh for George Fox University, spent a year in AmeriCorps after my undergrad degree, In addition, while I was an undergrad, got to spend about half a year in England going to school, which was a tremendous experience. My wife also took half a year and studied in Kenya. So we both had international experiences. Spent a year down in Southern California helping run a nonprofit called the Police and Community Activity League of Apple Valley. And that was a year-long experience in which we decided that California was not for us, that our real home and our love was in the state of Oregon. Came back here and got a law degree from Willamette Law School, and pretty much for ever since I practiced in Vancouver for a year, and then been in Portland in private practice ever since. And what my job is, when I'm not a legislator, is essentially taking small businesses from an idea to fruition, and then helping that small business person run their business, transition it if they want to buy or sell a business, and then help with their estate planning at the end of their career. So I get a real fun experience of both my district in Washington County and Clackamas County, because it does span both, and also working in Multnomah County in Portland, sort of in the heart of Oregon's economic center. This district that I represent, House District 26, is also very unique. It is, I call it the Banana Republic, because you look at a map and it starts down at Wilsonville and I-5 and looks sort of like a banana going all the way up to South Hillsborough and Century High School. It includes the communities of Wilsonville, Sherwood, King City, Bull Mountain, Tigard, part of Beaverton, part of Aloha, part of South Hillsborough, part of unincorporated Clackamas County, and part of unincorporated Washington County. And one of the defining themes of the district is transportation. This entire district stands at the outer edge of the urban growth boundary and of the metro area, and many of my constituents, including myself, commute from the district to somewhere else, whether it be downtown Portland or elsewhere in Washington County, or across into Clackamas County, or up to Nike or Intel or many of the small businesses in Washington County along TV Highway, on 26, Beaverton Hillsdale. People in my district are trying to get around, and they're having more and more difficulty doing it. And we're really facing a crisis in transportation funding and transportation infrastructure in the state of Oregon, and that's one of my primary goals in the 2015 session. As you look at our various funding sources for transportation, they're almost exclusively dedicated to their purpose. And what I mean by that is we have a general fund budget in the state of Oregon of roughly $16 to $17 billion. Now our all funds budget is over $60 billion, but that includes federal transfers and fees and things that we can't really touch, except for the specific purposes for which those funds are collected. So when it comes to our general fund of $16 to $17 billion, roughly half of that, a little bit less, goes to education. Actually, more than less than half goes to education. But of that 16, 17 billion, currently only about 10 to 20 million goes to fund our transportation infrastructure. Just think about that for a second. The money that you pay in your income tax, and our corporations pay in their income tax, which generally funds the general fund of 16 to 17 billion, only 10 to 20 million funds our transportation system. So most of the time you think you're writing a check to the state of Oregon and you're building some roads, and you'd be incorrect. Most of the time it's not going to build roads or infrastructure. The vast majority of our transportation funding comes from fees, the registration fees, the car fees, the truck fees, the gas tax that you pay every day at the pump, and our lottery. A little bit comes from the lottery. But by and large, it's a pay-as-you-go system that's paid for by our registration fees and our gas taxes. And the interesting thing about the gas tax is federally it hasn't been raised for many, many years. And in Oregon, the last time we raised it was 2009 by 6 cents. 6 cents. So we really haven't had a substantial increase in the federal or the state gas tax since the 90s. And since the 90s, if you think about what's happened with inflation and the purchasing power of those stagnant dollars, they've gone down by about half. So the same amount of money to buy asphalt, to buy concrete, to pave your roads, to do any of the infrastructure things, that purchasing power of the gas tax that's been collected has gone down. At the same time, fuel efficiency of the fleet, particularly in the last 10 years, has gone up dramatically. There's been a real push for people to buy more and more efficient cars. And so your purchasing power is going down, and the amount of the tax collected is actually going down because people are using less and less gas. So this pay-as-you-go system is having a harder and harder time sustaining the development and really just even sustaining the existing population in the state, and in particular in the metro area. And what that's led to is if we continue on the path that we're currently at, with the stimulus funds from the federal government largely spent, with the money from the last gas tax increase largely spent, with the federal gas tax stagnant. What we're left with is in a few years, if we don't take steps as a legislature to invest in transportation, we will only have enough money, and really we may not have enough money, to just barely maintain the road system that we have going forward. And there'll be no money available for capacity improvements. Any idea that you'd like to have to expand roads, to serve people in my district, especially north-south connectors, as people are trying to get from Wilsonville to Sherwood to Beaverton and up to Hillsborough, there's simply no money at the state level for that to be funded. We are left at a maintenance-only level. And then you look at counties. I mean, we're in the rich counties here, right? We're in Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington County. And even these counties are trying to scrape money together for road funding. If you look at our counties that are really have really been hit hard by the recession and have a declining population and have a declining economy, those counties in the south and the east of the state, they don't even have enough money right now to maintain the roads. They don't have enough money for basic public services when it comes to police, schools, and road and city maintenance. So unless we do something at the legislative level to both help our state roads and to help our local and our county partners, we're going to be in a dire situation. And there's this terrifying graph that we could put up on the wall if I had a projector showing the state of transportation funding, how it sort of peaked in the middle of the stimulus, and it's going down, 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 and it will continue on that path unless as a legislature we take action. So as Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee, working in concert with our former chair, Representative Breed, many of us are already meeting as legislators to try to craft a package to pass in the 2015 legislative session to get things done. A couple other items, and then I'll pass it on to Representative Breed. One of the items I campaigned on is trying to reduce the influence of corporate money and union money and money in general in the political system. We just had one of the most expensive elections that we've ever had in the state. If you just look at the, as it measure 92, the GMO measure, we had $10 million spent in the pro column and $20 million spent in the against column, and on one single measure in the state of Oregon, state that has about 4 million people. Population-wise, we're kind of in the middle of the states, but we're kind of down there. We're not a California, we're not a Texas, we're not an Illinois in terms of population. So the cost per dollar, something for that one ballot measure, was just extraordinary. And taking steps that we can do to both expose the influence of money in politics in the state, to limit it if at all possible, keeping in mind both the federal constitution and the way that's been interpreted, and the state constitution, which has an even stronger protection on the ability of individuals, corporations, and unions to use money to support political causes, are the things that we can do as a legislature to at least expose and make clear to the public the way that money is influencing the political system in the state of Oregon. That's also a key idea that I'm looking forward to working on in this coming session. I've got a couple of bills that I've already submitted on this matter, or will be submitted this week, and I'm looking forward to working with partners across the aisle, but because I think there's a common understanding that the amount of time that has to be spent fundraising is really deteriorating, both from the time that could be spent serving, and then also the influence that political ads have on the election season and how that carries into the service that we have as legislators. So there's something we could do there. And finally, I'd like to bring your attention to an issue that's in the Oregonian over the weekend and this week, which is the state of our mental health care system in the state of Oregon. I was just talking with the president here about my own father, who is a clinical psychologist and has been for over 50 years. He's 80 years old, he's been practicing since his 20s. He was a former director of a county mental health agency. And as I talked both with him and with a number of other people in the healthcare field about what's healthcare look like in 2015, what should we be focusing on, a lot of them have said making sure our mental health care system works in the state of Oregon. And I'd like to bring your attention to the Oregonian series right now. I think it's a 4-part series that's being run in depth about both the funding of our mental health care system and its actual results on the ground. And if we can take steps to have a more effective mental health care system, it has 2 primary objectives. First of all is to help those people who are suffering from addiction, an addiction that I've experienced in my own family, very close to me, and that has been treated in my own family, in some cases very successfully. And second, it's the cost that that addiction and a broken mental health care system have on the state of Oregon and on our federal government as well. The money that we have to pay in hospital beds in stays at the hospital, in mental health care clinics, in crime, in drug addiction, and not to mention simply the brokenness that we see in families that suffer from addiction. Those three things. There's three things that we could address in this coming session. I'd say it would be a success. Transportation funding, the influence of money in politics, and improving and making our mental health care system more effective. Those are the three things I'll be working on. Looking forward to turning it over to Representative Reed now, and then we'll take some questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks for letting us be here, and I have to start by saying something about a psychologist. Representative Davis and I have a lot of things in common. One of them is that we're both sons of psychologists. We've been called sons of other things too, I think, but sons of psychologists is something that's accurate that we share. I think I want to just give you some themes that I think will happen or come up in the legislature in this session. And then I want to do that briefly because I want to minimize the risk that I'm talking about things that you're not interested in. It's been my experience that we get most value out of this when we have conversations, we get to hear what you're thinking, and we get to explore some new ideas. So the reason I ran for the legislature and the reason I run for the legislature is that I'm frustrated by our relative inability to think and act for the long run. I think we do way too much defining of problems and solutions in the short run, often that coincide with elections, and that our system and the way we act in it doesn't line up with our long run interests. So I think you're going to see at least three major themes from the House and particularly from our caucus that we've talked about. This is not meant to be a partisan thing because I think there are themes with which we all agree. It's the interpretations where we'll have interesting discussions. But one is really about expanding opportunity. I think that's a value that we all share. It has to do with education, making sure that our K-12 system is well funded, making sure that we're not forgetting the full continuum, the early childhood investments that get people off to a good start, and higher education, which includes, of course, community colleges, career technical education, and plays a major role in giving people the chance to pursue their passions and live up to their full potential. We'll also be talking a lot about ensuring fairness, making sure that there's equal pay for equal work, that we're giving opportunities and helping businesses, whether they're small or large, making sure that those opportunities are well shared. And making sure that people have access to health care, that we have clean air and water. All of these things are really important as far as ensuring fairness. And finally, we want to make sure that we're rewarding work. No one who is willing and able to work full-time should be living in poverty. There's a rich discussion to be had around the minimum wage, around wage growth, making sure that we're having rising wages in Oregon. That serves everyone in a state that is so dependent on the income tax. When people are making more money, they'll be paying more taxes, there'll be reduced demand for government services, and we'll be able to invest in the things that make a difference. We think that people ought to have a chance to have some paid time off when they're sick or when a family member is sick, and that ought to be a statewide policy as opposed to one that's done city by city or county by county. And finally, one that I've been spending a lot of time working on is the issue of retirement security. There are not enough people who are saving for their retirement or who have access to ways to do that through their employer. So we have a proposal that would make that available to all Oregonians, that would be portable, be able to follow a person from job to job, take advantage of the pooling of those accounts and professional management as well. So we'll have hopefully a rich discussion about that. Those are kind of the broad themes, and I want to just briefly mention my own interpretation of that and where I think Representative Davis and I, again, are in very similar spots. I've said that being in the legislature is a lot like being in college. We have committees that end up being like classes. We don't always get to pick our own classes, they're picked for us, but we get to influence them, and eventually, whether it's formal or informal, we have to declare a legislative major. None of us can be experts in everything, even though our constituents, and I'm sure you will test us on this at the end of my comments, expect us to be experts or at least conversant in everything. We have to find some areas that we specialize in. I've really tried to focus on economic growth. I think that's the thing that fuels all the other things we want to do. And for me, there are three things that really make a difference in economic growth. The reality is that there's very little that an individual state can do to separate itself from what's going on in the world and in the country, but over the long run, I think there are three things. I think it's education, particularly higher education, innovation, and infrastructure. Representative Davis mentioned my role on the Transportation Committee. I have been chair of the committee. I have a new assignment on the policy side this session around higher education, innovation, and workforce development, but I'm glad that I continue to serve on the Transportation and Economic Development Subcommittee of Ways and Means. So the good work that Vice Chair Davis and his colleagues on the Policy Committee, the work that they do will likely, at least some of it, come to the Ways and Means Committee, where I'll hopefully be able to pick it up and move it forward. I think infrastructure is absolutely one of the most important things we can be doing in this next session. It has the short-run benefit of putting people to work, and the long-run benefit of increasing the capacity of the economy. We are, I think, coasting on the fumes of investments that our parents and grandparents made in infrastructure. And when the infrastructure is degrading, when unemployment is too high, and when money is very nearly free with low interest rates, it's a great time to be building. So we have huge opportunities and huge need there. The last thing I would say, which is sort of silly to say to a group like this, is how important the engagement of our constituents is. You've probably heard me tell this story before about Adam Davis, the pollster, who starts his focus groups by asking people to describe a service that government provides and that they value. This is the feedback he gets to start the discussion. Now, there's lots of room for all of us to debate what government should be doing and how it should be doing it, but I don't think there's anyone here who would contend that there isn't a role for government and there aren't services that we need and that we need to do collectively. So this is, I think, a way to underscore how important it is for people to engage. We are very accessible as legislators. We want to hear from you, and if I can be so bold as to make a request, I hope that you'll, whatever you take from our discussion today, I hope you'll engage with your most disinterested neighbors and family members and people that you encounter at the store or on the bus or anywhere else, and encourage them to fit some consideration and involvement in public affairs into their lives. We need it. Our state and our future depend on it. So thanks for being here. I'm not sure if, Rob, if you want us to be both up here for questions, that might be the most efficient way to do it.
You take it, you're good.
Here's a way to split it. Ask me the easy questions, and then we'll give Representative Davis the difficult ones. How's that? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. As a reminder, only forum members can ask questions. Please make them brief. And Representative Davis, if you join us up here in between bites, that would be cool. And again, the questions should be brief. Just let me take one quick reminder. We are well served here at the Pepper Mill, and just as a quick reminder, these folks managed to give us our food correctly without intimidating speakers or making it difficult, so let's not forget to give them a tip before we leave here today. And now, if I may, let's turn it over to questions.
Chris Leslie, former member. I just read a recent Wall Street article mentioning that with the gas going down price, the taxes will also go down. And it was warning that the government, federal, might be raising the gas tax there, and the states ought to take action right now to prevent the state's federal government from getting the majority of the taxes, because when you take money from here and it goes to Washington, we don't get much back. I was thinking that we should have maybe the gas tax raised here, and both of you are on the committees that would do that. May I have your opinion, please?
Thanks for the question. I definitely support an increase in the gas tax, and I would add two things to it. One is I think we should index that tax so that over time the purchasing power is not lost in the same way that it has been in the recent past. I also think that in the long run, the gas tax is a declining source that we have to move beyond. Representative Davis did a good job of describing that and the reasons for it around efficiency. We have to move from gas tax to a charge based on a person's use of the road, based on the miles that they drive. A lot of people react to that, and I think it's important to remember that the gas tax really is just a proxy for your impact on roads. In that scenario, you would be paying based on the miles that you drive as opposed to the gallons that you purchase. And that's needed because of the increased efficiency and because of the fact that some vehicles don't use any gas and still have an impact on the road. So I hope that we're going to have that discussion in this session, that we'll find a way to increase the gas tax and put it to good use on infrastructure that helps the economy. The road use charge is part of our discussion as well, absolutely. Representative Davis, you want to anything here?
Well, first, we should recognize that we do get a substantial transfer from the federal government on gas taxes collected that come back to Oregon and fund our road system. And there's, I think it's the mid-90s or early 90s was the last time the federal gas tax was increased. But to the extent that it is, I think the point is well taken, that having the ability to control our destiny at the state level is really where the money's at. And that would be the wiser choice. And making sure also that those investments are placed in smart places. Ensuring that we don't just raise the gas tax and then the money goes out the back door. Ensuring that it's used for, in this instance, what I'd support, congestion relief, capacity increasing, freight mobility. Those three things that A, will impact people's lives, that will put people to work, and will increase our economic output and our ability as an export state, one of the most export-dependent states in the nation, to get goods to market, goods to the ports. That's where we should focus.
I'm Bill Kroger, I'm a forum member. Thanks both of you for coming in. Representative Reed is my representative.
You're well served.
So yeah, he's a good, I like him, he does a good job. My wife's two big issues are helping Oregonians to attend college financially. It's getting more and more expensive, and it's getting harder and harder, and I just, both of those think the state needs to hopefully pony up some money or do something to help out in that area. The second one is a big issue for her especially, is this fast rail from up and down the valley, you know, would help economically even, but especially, you know, from Portland to Eugene, so kind of what's going on with that. And then the third thing is, a recent thing that's come up, is the issue on the aviation gas tax issue. Aviation gasoline, I think I know Tobias knows about that, so whatever you guys would like to talk about on those three things.
Okay, I'll start with the first, which is really higher education affordability. And this has come very close to home, having a 2.5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and starting our college funds, and looking at the inflation costs of higher education, and worrying that the growth of the investment value of those funds may not even track the growth of the inflation of the cost of higher education in the state, in the country, is really a concern. And many, many constituents in my district have kids in college or kids that are about to enter college. Really, if we look at the root of the problem in Oregon, there's no magic money. But the state has decreased our investment in our higher education system compared with other states consistently over the last 10 years. Please don't cite me, which means you will, but I think we're in the bottom 10 states in the nation are on our investment, maybe in the bottom 5 on a per student investment in higher education. And I have Oregon Tech in my district, which has opened up the Wilsonville campus with nearly 1,000 students. These are students who typically graduate in 4 years. They earn $50,000 to $75,000, and 90% of them are employed with a job 6 months after graduation. It is the success that we want to encourage. And every year I have multiple meetings with their president, and he comes in and talks about how, since he started in 2008, the funding has continually declined through the recession for Oregon Tech, even as it's producing just the sort of graduates that we as a state would want to support. Now, we've reversed that trend this last session by increasing some funding to higher education, but the draft budget that was proposed by the governor, I think it was last week or a week and a half ago, according to Oregon Tech and the colleges that we've talked to, continues to underfund relative to other states and relative to the need in Oregon. the ability to get kids in college affordably. And they won't be able to continue tuition reductions or tuition freezes if that proposed budget is passed. So like I said, there's not a magic bullet to this, is the problem. Higher education costs a substantial amount. A lot of the drivers behind that has been the increased amenities that students have wanted. Knowing a couple friends of mine who are on boards of private colleges and talking about the reasons for increases in tuition, there are efficiencies, a lot of efficiencies that can be drawn in our higher education system now, in particular through the use of community college and online learning. But at the heart of it is a continual disinvestment that we have to try to stem the tide from.
So it's going to be very tempting to continue the conversation on higher ed, because that's something I care a lot about too. I think what Representative Davis said is right. The other thing to keep in mind is just how we can attack that problem. One answer to that is the concept around dual credits. I talked with the Beaverton Superintendent Jeff Rose, who, and like Representative Davis, I can't remember the exact number, a really surprising proportion of seniors in Beaverton high schools don't have a full academic schedule. They don't need it. They'll head to graduation without having to take a class for the entire day. Now, some of those folks will use that free time intelligently, some will not, but shouldn't we be making it easier for them to get a head start on higher education by taking classes at PCC or some of the other higher education institutions in town? You can do that in a way that makes it easy for them, that saves them the cost of tuition and certainly the cost that's associated with room and board to their traditional higher ed students. So one way to do that may be through the use of dual credits, and we need to expand that. You also talked about high-speed rail. That's something that obviously is very interesting to us and I think has great potential, but it is, not to give anyone's hopes up, I think some way off. One of the challenges we're going to face in this session around transportation is even continuing to maintain the level of service that we currently have. The federal support for Amtrak service in Oregon is going away, and we'll be faced with the challenge of coming up with between, I think, $30 and $40 million just to maintain the current level of Amtrak service. At the same time, I think there is hope. It took a number of years, as you know, to establish the West Side Express service, the WES, and I know Representative Greenlick has a bill to continue that planning effort to extend that service to Salem. Even sort of Wilsonville south would make a difference, I think, and be a plus. But that will take some time, even from the acquisition of land and the financial planning there. And finally, aviation gas. As a general matter, I think the folks who want to increase the tax on aviation gas would like to use those dollars to support rural airports. I think the need there is clear. The trick about that is how that impacts the few commercial airports and our position as an attractive place for air service to come. That ends up being a factor as well. So we'll have to balance all those things, but I appreciate bringing them up.
Hello, and thanks for being here. I'm Spencer Erman, and I'm a member of the forum. The issue that I would like to ask a question about crosses over a couple of the areas that you've already addressed, transportation, and you've touched on healthcare and economic opportunity, and it's about diesel emissions. Diesel emissions are a well-established public health problem with calculated $2 to $4 billion public health costs in Oregon alone. These real public health costs have driven our neighboring states to take more aggressive action to reduce diesel emissions. The one with the greatest potential to impact Oregon is California, where new laws will outlaw the use of 2007 and older model engines in the state. We already know through Department of Transportation data that 1 in 5 trucks newly registered in Oregon was a 2007 or older model previously registered in California. Oregon legislators in both the House and Senate are proposing rules and policy to ensure that Oregon does not become the dumping ground for dirty diesel engines. What steps will you be able to take to ensure that when the California program comes into full implementation in 2015, Oregon will not become the leading market for the estimated 1 million trucks subject to the new California rules?
It's a great question for you, Tobias.
Well, we have had a tax credit program to help with retrofits of diesel engines, and I think we're both interested in continuing and expanding that and targeting it to make sure that it's the right, that it's effective. One of the challenges, of course, with tax expenditures is making sure that you're aimed at the transactions that wouldn't otherwise take place. And I think, frankly, the other thing we have to do is look at mirroring, or at least moving in the same direction as far as regulations. The balance, I think, is making sure that we're doing the things that drive good health outcomes while not having a dampening effect or an excessively dampening effect on the economy. So there are real advantages to being first in that line when we figure these things out, when we have a major truck manufacturer in Oregon, and they, I think, are in a position to be the market leader. So if we're helping to create demand for those new technologies, that can end up helping our economy as well. So I think it's a matter of balancing all of those things. I think there are ways to balance the regulations, the carrot and the stick between regulations and incentives at the same time.
One of the incentive programs that's working very well that I'd like to see continued and, if possible, expanded is our conversion to compressed natural gas program. There's the tax incentive program we have. There's also a revolving loan fund that we have, and we offer to, I believe it's cities and counties, if they'd like to convert their fleets from diesel and other fuels to compressed natural gas. They have the ability to take a loan from this fund, convert their vehicles, and then the reduced cost of operating those vehicles because of their increased efficiency and the health benefits that also come from it. The reduction in cost goes to pay the principal and the interest from that loan fund. In the end, it's a net zero to the state and to those local governments, but what we end up with is a healthier and a more efficient fleet at the end. Those sorts of opportunities are market opportunities to make sure it happens. The concern that I have with this particular proposal, frankly, is its impact on small business. I've had a number of discussions with small contractors in particular about its impact on construction contractors. And what we know is that adding additional layers of regulation can have an implicit and inherent ability to benefit the largest market holders in that particular market. Because those market holders generally have the largest profit margins, they have the easiest ability to absorb the costs of those regulations, and a further than ability to squeeze out small market players and small businesses in the state. And so this regulation in particular, although I'm excited to spend a little more time on it, the impact that it could potentially have on small business is troubling, because it would require small businesses coming out of a recession in some instances to repurchase equipment which has a lifetime of 10 or 20 years and repurchase it only after potentially 5 or 10 years of use. And that has a real cost on the ability of our small contractors and our small businesses to operate.
Jared Arnold, forum member. Thank you for being here today. My question has to do with Cover Oregon. Sort of the elephant in the room, isn't it? But before I do that, I understand the revenue forecast for the coming biennium is about another $2 billion. So I don't think there's a lack of money. It sounds like there's a lot of money. But coming back to Cover Oregon, is that I understand now that it sort of has to be taken apart, and that there are maybe 2 legislative committees that will decide what happens to Cover Oregon. Maybe the Senate and the House are coming together. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you anticipate will happen?
So I want to start on the revenue piece, and then Representative Davis is on that committee, so I'll let him talk about that, the specifics of that. You're right that there's more money in the revenue forecast, but it's really important to remember what the actual effect is, because each year when we continue to do the same sort of services to a greater number of people, and with inflation and all the other sorts of costs, there's something called roll-up costs. So it's important to think about that, and while there's more money, there's not more capacity. So the governor's recommended budget, there's an old saying about the governor proposing and the legislature disposing, but that's what we have right now as a way of starting. Even in his budget, where he does make some investments in various places. You heard Representative Davis already talk about the fact that doesn't even keep tuition at community colleges and the Oregon universities. So it's not as if we have a lot of money that our discussion is going to be about what things do we add. It's going to be about what do we try to maintain, and what are the things that are not going to keep up with service demands. So that's just one factor about it. I'll let Representative Davis talk about Cover Oregon from the committee perspective.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question on Cover Oregon, and I had meant to cover part of that in my beginning comments, so thank you. So Cover Oregon, as many of you know, has spent hundreds of millions of dollars of both transfer funds from the federal government and our own funds in the state to try to create an exchange where multiple insurers can offer their insurance products to consumers in a transparent manner, and with the added bonus, so to speak, of taking advantage of federal tax credits. Cover Oregon was unsuccessful in developing that technology with Oracle and a number of its other software partners, and by and large part, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment from federal and state money is not going to pan out for anything, because about 6 months ago, Oregon and the Cover Oregon board made the decision to transition to the federal technology, the healthcare.org technology, and we have essentially a one-year waiver running through the end of next year from the federal government to both use that technology and to take advantage of the tax credits. Now today is the last day of open enrollment on healthcare.org to take advantage of those tax credits. So if you need health insurance, and you haven't yet obtained it through healthcare.gov, this is a good opportunity to do it. But since we are using that federal technology, and since we've transferred many of the functions of this public corporation, the Oregon Healthcare Insurance Exchange, otherwise known as Cover Oregon, to the state and to the federal government, what's left in Cover Oregon is essentially a shell organization that serves as a marketing arm and that serves as a customer service arm for the Healthcare Insurance Exchange. We've determined that that is not an efficient way to continue operations for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's redundant to a lot of the functions that the federal government and state agencies already serve. So we're taking steps to potentially dissolve Cover Oregon, and the first line of the bill is the Cover Oregon Corporation, the Oregon Healthcare Insurance Exchange Corporation, is hereby dissolved. That's how the bill begins. It would dissolve the corporation, its assets and liabilities would transfer back to the state. DCBS, the Department of Consumer and Business Services, which currently houses the Oregon Insurance Commissioner and the Insurance Division, would take over the operations, the very limited operations that the state still operates. So the federal government would still operate the healthcare.org exchange where you go and health insurance is offered, but the state would certify plans through DCBS. It would serve as a marketing arm to Oregon consumers to let them know about the ability to obtain tax credits through the state exchange via the federal exchange. And it would serve as a customer service portal where if individuals have questions about their enrollment, and in particular if small businesses have questions about utilizing the exchange, they could go to DCBS. Now there's a lot of questions still about how this would actually work. DCBS has not given us a proposal yet for how it would work, other than saying we think we're the correct agency to take this operation on. And we're ramping down from Cover Oregon as a corporation which had over 150 employees, was going through tens of millions of dollars a month, down to a division of DCBS where most recently I was told they would have about 20 employees. So from 150 down to 20 employees. Most of the functions are with the federal government and on the insurer's ends. And those employees would essentially certify plans and serve as a customer service liaison between consumers and those plans that they want to adopt. So we're in the process. The timing is important in this, which is fairly interesting because insurers in Oregon, in large part because of adopting an exchange model, has one of the most competitive insurance marketplaces in the country. We now have at least 15 insurers operating insurance, and we're sort of used to it. I mean, a lot of us are used to Kaiser or Providence. We've kind of grown up with these options and don't realize that in certain states, there's one option. There may be two insurers in the state, but one insurer covers the southern portion of the state and one insurer covers the northern portion. So the fact that we have competition, which helps drive down cost, is an excellent thing in the Oregon market. And we want to make sure that that competition continues. But the timing is important because these insurers file their rate filings in early spring. And that means they have to get their rates for the following year approved by the Insurance Commission. And once those rates are approved, then the rates go back to the insurers and they develop the plans, they put them together, they market them so that they can be offered in the fall. And so the timing is we have to tell the market what the market's going to look like by early spring this coming year, and we have to pass a bill fairly early. So I would expect action on that bill sometime in February or March. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, John Bell, a forum member. I'm concerned with all our bridges. We have so many bridges in Oregon that are not federally, federal law, but under county law that needs to be under county control. They need to be replaced because they're not, an earthquake will take them down. We get a major one, which we're in this area of Oregon is going to be slated for one in the next 50 years, if not sooner. And we also just have the aging because when they built them, they didn't build them as good to show the age. A lot of them are 100 years old. They're still being used. And we haven't had any major construction in the Midwest has had, where the old bridges will break down and kill people, but we are getting close to that point where we're going to get some of that. State logistics are looking at trying to replace some of the bridges or refit them for earthquakes.
Absolutely. You know, one of the really great programs we had about a decade ago was one of the first OTIAs, the Oregon Transportation Investment Act, which targeted, I think, more than $1 billion to bridges and brought a substantial portion of the bridges that were then in dire shape up to snuff. They did that under budget and ahead of time, and I hope that we'll make that. We'll take the lesson from that and try to integrate that into our transportation infrastructure package going forward. You're right, bridges are a big problem. Unfortunately, they are not particularly unique when you look at the infrastructure more broadly, including pipelines and roads and public buildings. But I think it just underscores the importance and the opportunity of targeting infrastructure as an economic development and resilience strategy.
One of the keys that you mentioned is the fact that it's not just a state issue, but it's also a local issue. And many of our local county bridges, and even to the extent that cities have bridges, I have one in Wilsonville that went through kind of a debacle with its construction. It was reconstructed, thankfully, through insurance money, and we could get it done. But if, to the extent we do pass a transportation package in the 2015 session, making sure there's buy-in from the counties and the cities so that there's investment at the local level is going to be important, because that's one of the top priority issues for them in addition to just the road maintenance.
Thank you very much for being here.
Patrick Wheeler, thank you for coming. My issue is the roads are being torn up by studded tires, and that is money that has to be taken from transportation to cover that. When are we going to get studded tires out of the way? When we get it done in this session?
So one piece, the short answer is I don't know. One piece of information that is new to me and perhaps new to you, we have this discussion with some regularity. Last session, when we did this, we came to the conclusion that we really had two choices about the information. We had some Oregon-specific information that was very dated as to use and perceptions and those sorts of things, and we had some more recent data that was not Oregon-specific. So we managed to craft a study that ODOT just completed. And one very good piece of information from that study is that the use of studded tires is declining. Younger people are not using studded tires in nearly the numbers. So even in the absence of action from the legislature, the problem is going away over time because younger people are more apt to understand the relatively narrow range under which studded tires are helpful, and those that do want winter tires are more apt to be using studless technology, which is in nearly all cases just as effective or more effective. And even more interesting was the fact that most people, when asked why they chose not to use studless tires, pointed to road damage as one of the reasons that they did that. So I think there are ways to talk about fees so long as they are targeted, I think, in the areas where damage occurs. It is a significant number that's associated with that, but it's in specific areas. So Eastern Oregon, where more people use studded tires, is not the place where road damage generally occurs. They're more appropriately used, I think, in terms of the weather, and there are just fewer cars. So I think we had that discussion, if we targeted an approach to the areas where the damage actually occurs, which is here and in the Bend area.
I like Representative Reed's approach a lot because it's getting to the idea of smart regulation, smart governance, and the fact that we're heading in that direction, both with the incentives that the market is placing on studless tires, and also with the range and the ability that we've exerted as a state to only allow studded tires to be used in particular seasons. So first of all, making sure that whether it's a regional approach or it's a time-based approach, those are some very effective ways to reduce the damage that studded tires can have on our roads. In addition to taking a more global perspective on the cost, while there may be a greater cost to the state through our payment of road maintenance, there's also an aggregate cost to an outright ban, which is there's a lot of businesses and there's a lot of individuals who need to get to work and take their kids to work who have a legacy studded tire. And all of a sudden, are we going to tell them that you need to go out and buy a set of 4 tires at $400 a piece when you already had a tire you bought last year? And that aggregate cost across the state could be quite substantial on individuals and on consumers and on businesses in general. So it's not simply the cost that it might have on the state and road maintenance, it's also the cost that it would have on you if you own studded tires right now.
John Blackman, Forum member. This question is for John Davis. Compressed natural gas as a motor vehicle fuel. First off, I don't know how many pounds per square inch the compression is. Has legislation been introduced into the legislature regarding an alarm system? I'm thinking of a vehicle using compressed natural gas parked in an enclosed garage. This would really make the evening news. Thank you.
I'm thinking of a
warning system that would detect the presence of gas where it should not be.
I'm unaware of any state legislation to that effect. I simply don't know.
There's your chance.
Chris Leslie, Forum member again. I forgot to say thank you for being here. You're intelligent, and I now respect sales a lot more than I did before. Question, the oil trains, what is your position on these, and isn't it really a plus, and the detractors are really trying to undermine business? And I'm going to the socialist communist plot, but just to keep it simple, what's your position on oil trains?
Well, I'm glad you stopped short of the conspiracy theories. I think people who are opposed to oil trains are sincerely and genuinely concerned about the future of the planet and the role of carbon emissions and finite sources of fuel. So I take no issue with their motivation. I think it's difficult from a state perspective because I have yet to get a really good answer when I ask someone who feels that way about what they would like the state to do. It is largely a federal issue, and I think you can make the argument that because it's part of a world market, that if those trains or other ways of manufacturing that commodity doesn't come through Oregon, it's very likely that oil will get to its destination in some other on some other path, and that you could also argue that Oregon might be doing some good if we are especially vigilant and help maintain a higher standard around its transportation. But I think there's also reasons to say why does Oregon want to actively participate in that? Should we be using our efforts to help develop superior fuel choices and other options? So the bottom line is that because it's a limited role for the state, I'm not spending a lot of time on it. I'm more interested in making sure that we're smart on our transportation infrastructure and our investment strategies and that sort of thing.
I think, first of all, recognizing the reality that there are increased shipments of fuel through Oregon communities leads to a realization that ensuring there is sufficient safety response from our first responders is one of the immediate things that we can do as a state. So ensuring that information is there for first responders on when fuel is transported through their communities, and then ensuring proper training and supplies if there were to be a spill, so those first responders can actively respond effectively and have the right tools. That's one of the main things the state can do. We should be very vigilant of the fact that any prophylactic action could get us as a state involved in some very expensive litigation involving federal law very quickly, because this is largely an issue governed by federal law and really in the Constitution about interstate commerce and transportation between states. And if we take too aggressive of an approach, we can spend a whole lot of money in legal fees. In Oregon, the state often pays private law firms, not my own, unfortunately, to take these litigations on. And we just want to be sure that we take an approach that's both legal, but also focuses on safety first.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our program today, the television portion of it. There are some people still lining up to ask questions, and if Representatives Davis and Reed can stay just a few more moments after we close the TV program, I'd be grateful, as I'm sure the questions and the answers will continue in the same vein that they have. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Washington County Public Affairs Forum for December 15th. Give me just a moment to tell you some of the upcoming programs. This is our last meeting for 2014, and in 2015 we'll be starting off on January 5th, Monday, discussing the audit report for healthcare in the Washington County Jail, featuring Washington County Auditor John Hutzler and also Washington County Sheriff Pat Garrett. On the 12th of January, we'll be taking a look at TriMet changes with the General Manager, Neil McFarland. And on the 19th, the Tualatin Valley Water District will be discussing bringing water to Washington County from the Willamette, which may or may not sound scary depending on your knowledge level. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you very much. And Representative Reed, Representative Davis, thank you. This is the Washington County Public Affairs Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today, and this question is addressed to both of you. And Patricia Mayberry, forum member. Both of you mentioned in your opening remarks about the lack of input from your constituents, and you both wish that more people would be communicating with you. My question to you is, if for those people who take the time to come to the legislature, how would you suggest best communicating with not only representatives from your own district, but other people as well?
Well, I think the first thing is to the extent you can anticipate your visit, let us know, and we can build our schedule around yours. I think every legislator is clear, and everyone in the building is clear that constituents come first. Those who are there regularly and are paid to be there will step aside, and we'll find time to meet with you. So I think that's the first thing. And in general, the things that are most helpful for me, and I think for most legislators, is direct and personal stories. Your perspective on things that we're considering, things how an idea has or would affect you. It's much more effective for us to hear a personal communication than the talking points that someone has generated or a form email that someone else has written. So I think speak authentically, write authentically, and let us know what you think.
And like Representative Reed mentioned, for us as representatives and as legislators, I think we gain respect in Salem and in the Capitol when we focus on an issue, we become an expert, maybe it's 2 or 3 issues, and we major on a couple things. And it's much more effective, I think, as a constituent to come down and say, hey, I have an issue that I've studied, I've been involved at the local level, this is a particular bill or a particular issue that I'd like to share my input on, here's what I've learned, and here's what I suggest a good approach could be. Taking a more specific rather than general approach, and that can dovetail often into the ability of us as legislators to get you in front of a committee for a hearing. Maybe we don't even have a hearing on that particular subject scheduled, but if we know your interest and we know your ability and we know your education, we often have the ability to talk to that chair and say, hey, could you give us a short informational hearing to my constituent? Then the committee administrator and our staff can potentially gather other people on that issue. And it really doesn't take a lot. It's amazing, some of the citizens who have learned the process and they know how to work down in Salem, how effective they have become on particular issues. It's very empowering, both as a legislator and as a citizen, to know that in Salem and in Oregon, you can actually still make a difference if you focus, if you become educated, and if you let your voice be heard.
John Williams, board member. So I'm kind of interested in events going on with the Department of Environmental Quality, and probably most likely is that it's a tremendously underfunded organization. They can't do the job that they're supposed to do, and that's enforcement. Maybe the rules need to be changed so that they don't have to enforce as much. But I kind of like the fact that they do kind of watch out for Oregonians and their health. And so my concern is right now we're having some air pollution problems in Washington County, whether it's through the Hillsborough Airport, the fuel emissions from the airplanes, or maybe I understand that Intel has a little bit of problem capping their emissions as well. So can you tell me a little bit about how we can better fund DEQs so that they can better enforce some of the things that they need to be doing?
Mr. Ways and Means?
Well, the trouble with DEQ is that it's funded through those that it regulates. It gets very little in general fund, and so its success is tied to its enforcement mechanisms. We could fund DEQ much better, and we could fund it from general fund, but at the risk of being blunt about it, that would come at the cost of something else. So then we're talking about DEQ versus schools or other things. So this is where I sort of quote Representative Davis on higher education. There is no magic bullet here. We have to decide what the priorities are from the resources that we have.
I think we've been successful in finding the one defender of DEQ that I've ever met before, John. And I mean that because of all the agencies that we get emails about, DEQ is not at the top of the list for people saying thank you for the wonderful job they're doing, because typically it's a company or an individual that's under investigation who's writing to us. But that being said, the services and the functions that DEQ does perform are very important from two perspectives. First of all, as a regulator, there are multiple approaches to how DEQ can view regulation. One is to be an agency that operates under outright bans or outright denials of permits and of applications and of projects. And if that's the case, there's going to be a lot of antagonism, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits, there are going to be a lot of opportunities for those who are regulated by DEQ to be as aggressive as possible in their application process. There are other agencies that we deal with, and I'm not saying that's where DEQ is, but I'm saying that's one perspective. The other perspective is to have a regulator that says, how do we do our job in a smart way that protects the public, but also gets to yes for the economy and for the public and for those whose jobs are affected and for those whose communities are affected by this project in particular. Because we're often dealing with projects where communities say, we want to find a way to yes on this. Please make sure this is done in a safe way. And if your agency, and certain agencies are viewed this way, I think DCBS is a good example of one where they have a very aggressive consumer protection perspective, at the same time balancing that with consumer protection in the marketplace and making sure that the state works. And to the extent that we can draw more agencies towards that model, I think you'll have a more collaborative process that gets more done.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
We exhaust the questions?
I mean, Representative Reed needs his sandwich, man. He hasn't had a bite.
It's all right.